What if I told you that Barron Trump, a figure often seen in the shadow of his famous father, just stunned the world with an unexpected act of kindness, one that no one saw coming? Would you believe it? You need to hear this. It was a crisp autumn afternoon in Washington, D.C., when the world began to witness something truly remarkable. Barron Trump, the youngest son of former President Donald Trump, had always been in the public eye, often seen at events or in the background of his father's speeches. But there was something different about this day, something that would forever change the way people saw him. Barron had always been a relatively private figure. Unlike his older siblings, he kept a lower profile, rarely engaging in public displays or making waves in the media. His life had been shielded from the intense scrutiny that often comes with the spotlight. While the world knew Barron as the quiet, reserved son of a powerful figure, few really knew him beyond the headlines. But on that day, all of that was about to change. It began when a seemingly ordinary event turned into something much more significant. Barron had been attending a charity gala held at one of the most prestigious venues in Washington, known for its glitzy fundraisers and high-profile guests. It was an event meant to raise awareness for a cause that was close to his heart, one that had been a passion of his for years, even though few people knew about it. The gala was buzzing with conversation. Laughter filled the grand hall as people mingled, exchanging pleasantries, and the air was thick with the clinking of glasses and the soft hum of orchestra music in the background. Barron, standing near the back of the room, appeared somewhat aloof, quietly observing the crowd around him. He wasn't one for large social gatherings, and it was clear that the spotlight was never his preferred place to be. But he had an important reason for being there. Unbeknownst to the guests, Barron had been moved by a cause that many of them had taken for granted: homelessness. For years, Barron had secretly been working behind the scenes to make a difference, not in the way you might expect from a young man of his stature, but in a deeply personal way. His efforts, mostly hidden from the public eye, had always been driven by a desire to help those who were often overlooked. While many assumed his life was one of luxury and privilege, Barron's heart had always been attuned to those who had little. That night, something was about to unfold that would stun everyone in the room and in the world. As the gala moved forward, Barron made a quiet decision that no one saw coming. His actions were subtle at first, but as the evening wore on, they would resonate across the nation, leaving people in awe. It wasn't the large, flashy donations that often get attention at such events. It wasn't about the speeches or the glamorous fashion on display. No, Barron's act of kindness wasn't designed to be seen, but somehow, that made it even more powerful. As the event continued, Barron stepped away from the crowds and headed outside. It was a small gesture, but it was the beginning of something that would ripple outwards and make waves in ways no one could have expected. There, waiting in the cold, was a man. A homeless man, bundled in a thin coat, sitting on the steps of the venue. He hadn't asked for help. In fact, he hadn't said a word. He was simply one of many invisible people in the city, drifting through the cracks of society. But Barron noticed him. Most people might have turned a blind eye, moving past him without a second thought. But Barron, with his quiet and compassionate nature, took a different route. Barron approached the man, his footsteps muffled against the sidewalk. As he did, he reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was simple, yet profound. He handed it to the man with a nod, his face serious but warm. The man looked up, surprised, his eyes meeting Barron's for the first time. Without a word, Barron turned and walked away, leaving the man there, gazing at the envelope in his hands. What the man didn't know at that moment was that inside the envelope was a sum of money that would change his life forever. It was enough to get him off the streets, enough to provide him with the resources he needed to rebuild his life, enough to give him hope. It wasn't the kind of publicity stunt that you'd expect from a celebrity or a high-profile figure. Barron didn't want anyone to know what he had done, and for all intents and purposes, the world wouldn't have known if it hadn't been for a chance encounter the next morning. The man, overwhelmed and grateful, spoke to a reporter outside the venue. The story quickly spread, and soon the world was learning about Barron Trump's unexpected act of kindness. The news traveled fast, and it wasn't long before the act of generosity went viral. But this wasn't just about the money. It was about the quiet power of empathy. It was about Barron stepping out from behind the shadows and showing the world a side of him that had always been there, but had never been fully seen. It wasn't just a donation. It was a moment of human connection, an unspoken understanding that someone cared. And in a world that often felt disconnected and divided, Barron's simple gesture reminded people that even the smallest acts of kindness could have the greatest impact. As news outlets began to pick up the story, questions started to surface. How had Barron, who had always been portrayed as reserved and out of the public's eye, been involved in such a powerful act of charity? Why had he chosen that moment, that person, and what had inspired him to act? For the first time, the world was getting a glimpse into a side of Barron Trump that few had ever seen before. But as the story unfolded, more questions began to arise. Who else had Barron helped in silence? And why had he chosen to remain so hidden, even as his act of kindness became a worldwide sensation? What other surprises lay hidden beneath the surface of Barron Trump's life? These were questions that would soon be answered, but for now, one thing was certain: Barron Trump had just stunned the world in a way that no one had expected. As Barron's unexpected act of kindness continued to make headlines, the world began to change the way it viewed him. His quiet generosity became the subject of countless discussions, as people tried to understand the motivations behind his actions. Was it a one-time thing? Or was there more to this story than anyone could see? For weeks after that autumn gala, rumors swirled about Barron's involvement in other charitable causes. Stories began to emerge about his private meetings with organizations dedicated to mental health, homelessness, and at-risk youth. People close to him revealed that Barron had been giving quietly for years, working behind the scenes to support causes that mattered to him. The more people learned about Barron's secret life, the more questions arose. Why had he kept his generosity so hidden? Why had he, a member of one of the most public families in the world, chosen to stay out of the spotlight? Barron's decision to remain silent only added to the mystery, leaving people to wonder what other surprises lay beneath the surface. It was clear now, this wasn't just an isolated act of kindness. Barron Trump had a deeper connection to the world around him than anyone had ever known. But just as the world began to piece together this new version of Barron, a shocking revelation turned everything on its head. It was a late night in November when the first leaked email surfaced. The email, seemingly sent by someone within Barron's inner circle, detailed a project Barron had been secretly working on for months. The project was ambitious, designed to tackle the homelessness crisis on a scale never before attempted. It wasn't just about providing temporary shelter or food. It was about long-term solutions, rehabilitation, and reintegration into society. Barron's vision was clear. He wanted to build a network of facilities where the homeless could not only find shelter, but also receive education, job training, and mental health support. The email outlined plans for a massive initiative, one that would require millions of dollars, the cooperation of multiple government agencies, and the involvement of powerful corporate donors. But the most shocking part of the email wasn't the scale of the project, it was Barron's role in it. For the first time, it became clear that Barron wasn't just quietly donating money. He was actively leading these efforts, managing a network of charities and partnerships without anyone knowing. He was working tirelessly, often behind the scenes, to bring his vision to life. The email described how Barron had spent countless hours meeting with experts, touring shelters, and speaking with those affected by homelessness to understand the problem from every angle. It was a level of involvement and dedication that no one had ever imagined from him. The leak quickly went viral, and once again, the world found itself captivated by Barron's actions. People couldn't believe what they were reading. How had Barron managed to keep such a massive project under wraps? How had he kept his involvement so secret, despite the growing network of people working with him? It was almost as if he had created a shadow organization, operating in the background without anyone ever suspecting his hand in it. But the email also raised more questions. Who had leaked it, and why? Was this a planned reveal, or had Barron's secrecy been compromised? Some speculated that it was an intentional move to force the public to acknowledge his efforts, while others believed it was a mistake that Barron would later regret. As the story continued to unfold, Barron's quiet demeanor began to shift. The media was relentless in trying to uncover more about his personal life, his charitable initiatives, and his motivations. Barron, however, remained as private as ever, offering no public comments or interviews. His silence only deepened the intrigue. Was he merely being humble, or was there something more complex at play? Behind the scenes, those who worked closest with Barron were becoming increasingly uneasy. They had always known about his passion for helping others, but they also knew the risks that came with such a high-profile initiative. The more attention Barron's work garnered, the more likely it became that his involvement would be exposed. And as the leaks continued to surface, it became clear that the pressure was mounting on Barron to step out from the shadows. But Barron wasn't ready. Despite the growing media frenzy, he continued to work in silence, making decisions and guiding his projects without fanfare. He had a singular focus on the people he was trying to help, on the lives that were being transformed because of his efforts. His passion for making a difference was unmatched, but his reluctance to step into the public eye remained unwavering. Still, as more stories emerged about his silent contributions, it was impossible to ignore the growing admiration for him. People were starting to see Barron not as just the quiet son of a former president, but as a compassionate individual with a vision that extended far beyond his family name. Barron Trump was no longer just a figure in the background. He was becoming a symbol of change. But even as the world began to recognize his efforts, Barron's journey was far from over. His greatest challenge was yet to come. The scale of his ambitions was about to take him into uncharted territory, and it would require him to make decisions that would impact not only his own life, but the lives of countless others. As the public began to learn more about Barron's plans, whispers began to circulate about the people who had been affected by his kindness. Stories surfaced about individuals whose lives had been changed by Barron's work, but those stories were always just out of reach, never fully revealed. There were always more questions than answers. And with every new development, the tension continued to rise. Who had Barron helped, and what other mysteries were waiting to be uncovered? Was he truly as selfless as he appeared, or was there a deeper motivation behind his actions? And most importantly, how would Barron handle the growing pressure and attention now that the world was watching him? The story of Barron Trump's incredible act of kindness was only just beginning to unfold. The world had seen a glimpse of who he truly was, but there was much more to discover. The day of the grand unveiling was unlike anything Barron had ever experienced. After months of careful planning and secrecy, the time had finally come to reveal his ambitious project to the world. The venue was packed. Politicians, business moguls, activists, and a sea of journalists all gathered in anticipation. Barron, usually so comfortable in the shadows, was about to step into the spotlight. As the event began, Barron took his place at the podium. His appearance was calm, composed, yet there was a tension in the air. The press had already gone wild with speculation about the nature of his project. What was this mysterious initiative he had been working on? Would it change the course of history, or was it just another fleeting idea from a young heir trying to prove himself? Barron stood before the crowd, the weight of the moment pressing on his shoulders. He knew that once he spoke, there would be no turning back. The world's eyes were fixed on him, waiting for him to reveal the true scope of his intentions. He cleared his throat and began to speak. It's often said that the world's problems are too big for one person to solve. Barron's voice rang out, steady and unflinching. But I've learned that sometimes, if you just focus on one person at a time, you can make a world of difference. The crowd fell silent. They weren't expecting this. Barron wasn't standing there to announce a business venture or a political stance. He wasn't there to flaunt his family's wealth or legacy. He was there to speak about people, the real human beings whose lives had been overlooked for far too long. I believe that every person deserves a chance to change their life. And I'm not talking about a quick fix or a temporary band-aid. I'm talking about real, lasting change. His words struck a chord, but it wasn't until he began unveiling the specifics of his plan that the room began to stir with disbelief. Barron's initiative wasn't just about creating shelters. It wasn't about giving away food or temporary solutions to homelessness. What he was proposing was nothing short of revolutionary. Barron had designed a network of rehabilitative centers that would help individuals in the most marginalized communities, not just survive, but thrive. His plan involved partnerships with corporations, universities, and government programs to provide education, job training, medical care, and psychological support to those in need. This isn't a charity, Barron continued, his voice firm with conviction. This is a movement. This is about creating opportunities for people who have been left behind. This is about rebuilding lives, one person at a time. The audience was in shock. It was a plan of monumental scale, one that could completely shift how society viewed the issues of poverty and homelessness. But Barron wasn't finished. He revealed that he had already been in talks with several powerful organizations, all of whom had agreed to join the cause. These were not just vague promises. Barron had already secured commitments, already laid the groundwork, already built a network of allies. But just as the press began to stir with excitement, a sudden, unexpected question broke through the tension. Mr. Trump, if you're truly committed to this cause, why did it take so long for anyone to know about it? The voice from the back of the room was sharp, and Barron's heart skipped a beat. It was a question he had been dreading. The media had been buzzing with rumors of his secretive nature, and now the question was here, ready to challenge everything he had built. Barron paused. For a brief moment, he seemed lost in thought. He had prepared for this moment, but no amount of preparation could have fully prepared him for the weight of that question. Because, Barron finally said, his voice unwavering, this wasn't about my name. It wasn't about gaining attention or getting recognition. This was about helping people, no matter who they are or where they come from. And I didn't want to take the spotlight from the real heroes of this movement, the ones who are on the ground, working every day to make a difference. His words were met with a stunned silence. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. Barron had just revealed the truth that no one had expected, the one thing that made his initiative so different from anything anyone had seen before. But before anyone could fully digest his answer, another twist took everyone by surprise. As Barron continued to speak, one of the most unexpected guests of the evening made an appearance. The doors of the venue swung open, and a group of individuals entered. A group that included some of the very people Barron had been helping in secret. These were individuals who had once been homeless, jobless, and forgotten by society. Yet here they were, standing proudly alongside Barron, dressed in new clothes, smiling and ready to share their stories. Each one of them stepped forward to speak, recounting how Barron's quiet efforts had turned their lives around. One by one, they spoke of the rehabilitation programs, the job training, the medical support that had given them the chance to rebuild. Their testimonials were raw, emotional, and powerful. It wasn't just the food or the shelter, one woman said, her voice trembling. It was the belief that someone cared, that someone saw us as more than just another statistic. Barron didn't just give us a roof. He gave us hope. The room was filled with emotion as these individuals shared their stories, and it became clear to everyone in the audience that Barron's work was not just about providing aid. It was about restoring dignity and self-worth. He had given these people not just a second chance, but the tools to succeed. As the last speaker finished, the room erupted into applause. But even as the crowd cheered, Barron's thoughts were elsewhere. He was already thinking ahead, already planning his next steps. This was just the beginning. The true impact of his work had only started to ripple out, and Barron knew the journey ahead would be challenging. The road to lasting change was never easy, and the obstacles were far from over. But Barron wasn't deterred. In that moment, surrounded by the very people whose lives he had changed, he understood the true power of his mission. It wasn't about public recognition. It wasn't about fame. It was about making a real, tangible difference in the lives of those who needed it most. The world had just witnessed Barron Trump's greatest act of kindness, but for Barron, it was just the beginning. As the press frenzy died down and the last of the journalists packed up their equipment, Barron stood in the quiet aftermath of his presentation. The grand hall was now empty, save for a few staff members and the people whose lives he had transformed. His mind was still racing, processing the gravity of what had just happened. The evening had gone better than he could have imagined. The world had reacted with awe and admiration, and for the first time in his life, Barron felt as though he had truly earned his place, not because of his name or his family's legacy, but because of his actions. The initiative he had unveiled was being hailed as one of the most revolutionary social movements of the decade. But as the applause faded, Barron couldn't shake the feeling that the real work was just beginning. He had sparked a fire, a movement but now it was time to keep it burning. The challenges ahead were immense. There would be resistance, opposition, and endless obstacles. But Barron had learned something vital that night. It wasn't about perfection. It was about progress. Every small change mattered. As the press conference concluded and the last of the cameras were turned off, Barron made his way to a quiet corner of the venue. He needed a moment to himself, away from the bright lights and the eyes of the world. The weight of what he had just started was starting to sink in, and he knew the road ahead would be long and uncertain. Just as he sat down, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from his mother, Melania. He smiled softly as he read the message. "I'm proud of you, Barron. But remember, the world will try to tear you down. Stand strong." Her words hit home. It was a reminder that Barron was entering uncharted waters. This wasn't a story about a young man using his privilege for personal gain. This was a story about a young man who had chosen to do something far harder, to use his privilege to elevate others. And in doing so, he had set himself on a path that would be met with both praise and criticism, admiration and resentment. But Barron wasn't afraid. He had already seen firsthand the impact of his work. He had seen the transformation in the faces of those whose lives had been altered by his initiative. It wasn't just the tangible outcomes, like jobs secured or homes built. It was the intangible ripple effect, the restoration of hope, the lifting of spirits, the realization that no matter how broken someone's past had been, they could still shape their future. In the coming weeks, Barron's initiative gained momentum. News outlets across the world reported on his efforts. Political figures began to endorse his program, and corporations offered their support. What had started as a vision in Barron's mind was quickly turning into a global movement, one that sought to redefine how society viewed poverty, homelessness, and human dignity. Yet, despite the growing success of his project, Barron kept his focus on the people. The ones who had shared their stories at the press conference, the ones who were just beginning their own journey of transformation. Barron made it his personal mission to ensure that his initiative was sustainable, that it would continue to evolve and reach more people. He worked tirelessly, often behind the scenes, making sure that the partnerships were strong and the resources were flowing. But there was still one thing that kept Barron up at night. He couldn't shake the feeling that the media and the public were still missing the deeper message of his work. They had focused so heavily on the scope of the initiative and his family connections that they had overlooked the heart of the matter. The simple truth that one person, when committed to change, could indeed alter the course of many lives. One evening, as Barron sat with his team discussing future plans, he received another message, this one from someone unexpected. It was from a young man named James, one of the individuals Barron had helped. James had been living on the streets for years before coming to the rehabilitation center. His story was like many others, a tragic tale of loss, struggle, and abandonment. But Barron had seen something in him, something that had inspired him to offer a helping hand. The message read, "I just wanted to thank you. Your program gave me my life back. I have a job now, I have a place to stay, and for the first time in years, I have hope. You didn't just change my life. You changed my entire future." Barron read the message over and over, each time feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. It was moments like this, when the results of his work were right in front of him, that kept him going. James wasn't just another success story. He was a living testament to the power of compassion, the power of one person choosing to make a difference. The success of Barron's initiative wasn't measured by the number of headlines it made or the accolades he received. It was measured by the real, lasting impact it had on the lives of the individuals who had been given a second chance. Barron understood now that the true measure of success wasn't in the attention it garnered, but in the quiet transformations happening every day, in the lives of people who had once been forgotten. As the months passed, Barron continued to push forward, facing new challenges with determination and resilience. But the foundation he had built, one of kindness, dignity, and empowerment, remained strong. And in the hearts of the people whose lives he had touched, Barron Trump's legacy was already cemented. The world would remember the shocking moment when Barron Trump stunned the world with his act of kindness. But for Barron, the true story was just beginning. As Barron's journey continues, He knows the real change starts with people like you. He took a stand, made a difference, and now it's your turn. Barron's message isn't just about one individual. It's about all of us. The simple truth that kindness can spark a movement, and together, we can transform the world. Now, I want to know, what's the most impactful act of kindness you've witnessed or experienced? How did it change you? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your story could inspire someone else. If Barron's story moved you, share this video with someone who could use a little hope. Let's spread this message of compassion far and wide. And before you go, ask yourself, how can you make a difference today? What small step can you take to be part of this change? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's continue this conversation.